5 3 9 7 1 5.
Welcome to this Mother's Day episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the studio every week challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Samantha Carter
and Sarah Jones.
Happy late Mother's Day. You should take advantage of nail salons being open and go get your nails done. So like me, your nails look great, and that's pretty much it. Just so you're all aware, my hair still looks like poop. How about your hair?
Me too. My box dye didn't hold. I gotta go back to my bathroom salon.
Happy quarantine.
So fun.
Before we get started, we want to give a quick shout out to Nick Weaver and the Regulators podcast, which is a podcast that reviews, rates, and recommends other podcasts. And they just featured Bigfoot for Breakfast and gave us their review, so make sure you check them out. You can find links to that episode on our Twitter and Facebook. So after you check that episode out, go ahead and keep listening to their show and find out which podcast you may or may not be interested in listening to. With that, on to this week's topic.
But first, Regulators. Get it?
Let's mount up.
Mount up. And then he's all like, mount down. Regulators.
I love it. Really, the name is pretty clever.
Yeah, it was.
I was pretty excited about it.
I like it. I feel like he gave us a fair assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're going to take his advice and get right into the topic now instead of screwing around forever.
Right.
But without completely giving away our topic today, which I guess the name probably really does, I have a joke for you. I have a dad joke.
Okay. What's your dad joke?
Okay, so my kid told me this one a while back, and I thought it was rather fitting. I made him repeat it last night because I couldn't remember exactly what it was. So what do you call an alien with muscles?
What?
A flextraterrestrial.
Wow.
I know, it was good.
That was a
funny.
post-millennial joke.
It was not. Yeah, it kind of was. Anyway.
Don't be so flextra.
Flextra. Okay, so this week we're actually going to discuss an incident which occurred in Kentucky in the year 1955. In the rural town of Kelly, Kentucky, to be exact, there was a nestled family farm belonging to the Langford Sutton family. It was a modest, unpainted house consisting of 3 rooms. And when I say modest, I mean without the luxury of running water, telephone, radio, TV, books. So residents of the home were the family matriarch. She was 50-year-old Glennie Langford, and she was a widow. She had her 2 older sons there from a previous marriage, Elmer, who they called Lucky Sutton, who was 25 years old at the time, and JC, or John Charlie Sutton, who was 21 years old at the time. Their wives, Vera, who was 29, and Aline, who was 27. A brother-in-law was also present, a Mr. O.P. Baker, and the widow's younger children, Charlton, Lonnie, and Mary Langford, who were 12, 10, and 7. So we've got 9 people, right, total in the house.
You heard it. She did the math.
But I've been called out on math a couple times in this whole situation.
That's true. The story begins like this. A friend of the family named Billy Ray Taylor, who was 21 years old, and his wife June, who was 18 years old at the time, were visiting the Suttons from Pennsylvania. Billy Ray had become acquainted with Elmer, aka Lucky Sutton, while working for a traveling carnival.
Which I'm super jealous about because that's pretty much my dream job.
Right?
I just want to be a carny so bad. Join the circus.
I know, especially after watching Water for Elephants. I totes wanted to join the circus and
that
get
movie
thrown off a train.
That movie wasn't even as good as the book was. Did not do it justice.
And now we're doing book reviews.
We may have to start a whole second podcast.
The world needs to hear this ear candy. What can I say?
That's right.
It's gotta be put out there. Anyway, it was approximately 7 o'clock on Sunday evening. It was hot out, and that month had provided very little rain. Billy Ray Taylor was retrieving water from the backyard well. While performing his task, he witnessed what he described as a silvery object, quote, real bright with an exhaust all the colors of the rainbow, end quote. According to Billy Ray, he watched as the unknown object silently moved towards the house, passing over it. The object then stopped abruptly in midair, at which point it dropped straight to the ground. When Billy Ray shared his experience with the Suttons, he was laughed off. No one took it seriously. But wouldn't you at least go out and try to see for yourself?
I'm assuming that, they were all busy with their visitors, and they probably just assumed that he saw a shooting star or a comet or something and didn't think much of it.
It was daylight.
It was like 7. It's getting kind of dark. It's August, so yeah.
Do I spend much time in Kentucky? Nah.
I want to. Aside from my carnival job, my other dream is living in a camper in the mountains. It's my favorite place ever. If someone told me that it looked like it actually landed, though,
He said it did.
you bet your sweet ass I'd be running down there trying to see what was up.
He said a big metal disc that was spitting out rainbows flew over the house and then dropped to the ground shortly after passing over the house. How would you not be like, let's go?
Maybe he was a man who was known for having a flair for the dramatic. About an hour after Billy's supposed UFO sighting, the dogs began barking, as if there was something outside the house. The barking continued incessantly, so Lucky Sutton and Billy Ray made their way to the back door to see what the issue was. What they saw was a strange light glowing from outside. So the earlier incident where Billy Ray saw the object fly across the sky and land, it was about 7 o'clock during the summertime, so it's probably still kind of light outside. Where now we're hitting about 8 o'clock or after, so it's probably getting much more dark just to set the scene. So from out of this glowing, strange light emerged a small silhouette, about 3.5 feet tall. It's a humanoid-looking figure with a large round head. Its eyes, larger than normal and glowing with yellow light. Its skin shimmered like metallic silver reflecting the moonlight. The creature appeared to have long arms for its body, reaching almost to the ground. They extended into talon-like fingers and large, triangular, floppy ears. Disturbed by what they were seeing, 2 men grabbed their firearms. One was a 20-gauge shotgun, and the other a .22 rifle, and they fired at the creature.
America.
Yep, because that's what we do. Rural America.
The small figure raised its hands to the sky as if to surrender at the sound of the gunfire. But it continued approaching the door where the men stood. Suddenly, it did a flip, scrambling as if in a panic and fleeing into the darkness.
So it somersaulted away.
Duh, wouldn't you? I mean, I do that. I do flips all the time.
Something
scares me. I'm going to do a double backflip, and
I tried to do a flip on video a while back, and it was rough. It was parkour.
yeah, parkour.
I kind of just fell down. I'm not a graceful girl.
That's the understatement of the year. This is where the story really gets more eventful. So it wasn't long after the first encounter of the little gray creature. Okay, so specifically, I want to say this story is the origin for the term little green men.
Is it really?
Yes.
Oh.
That's what I found in my research. So, first of all, never at any point were these creatures described as green.
They didn't say green?
No, never. They were gray. They were metallic gray,
Just
specifically
silvery.
the whole time.
Okay.
I don't know where green came from.
Well, you know how it goes.
Yeah.
Game of telephone and such.
True story. It wasn't long after the first encounter with the little little gray creature that the men saw through a window another one of the creatures outside the house. Again, in true American fashion, they fired at the little guy who matrix flipped and again disappeared into the darkness. The little guy's got some moves.
Sounds like it.
So Billy Ray mustered up some courage and actually walked out of the house, and he was standing under the roof's overhang. And according to the Langford Suttons, who were standing near the doorway, so they were standing behind him and he was standing outside the door.
So he's kind of like a little farther out on the porch than they are.
Yeah.
At the edge of the porch where they're in the doorway.
Just under the overhang.
Okay.
And they saw a little claw-like hand come down from the roof and touch his hair.
Mm-mm.
So the entire group freaked out, as well they should. I know I would.
Did they save Billy Ray?
Billy Ray!
That is what I would sound like.
Right?
I mean it.
So they grabbed Billy Ray and pulled him back into the house.
Emilio!
So Lucky, as most people might have done, as I definitely would have done, this part cracks me up, fired a shot at the creature on the roof and then fired a second shot toward a nearby tree, where he saw yet another of the short silvery creatures. So he's in the house.
So we're up to 3 separate creatures at this point?
Well, maybe.
Well, at this point.
They're really fast moving, so we don't know if it's one creature moving all over the place or
if there's different.
I mean, he's doing backflips. So they described that it then descended gracefully to the ground and disappeared into the woods.
So he's on the roof and then he kind of just floated down.
Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins. That's what I was trying to list. I'm like, what is that? Like Yeah, Mary Poppins down to the ground.
A spoonful of sugar helps the aliens float down. So as it skittered away, it sounds as though the creatures were really quick and swift in their movements. It would be difficult given the circumstances to determine if there's just a few of them moving rapidly from one spot to the next or if there were several. However, they do seem to have the whole house under siege. It sounds like the men had fired upon the unidentified beings at least 4 times. Once from the back door, 2 shots from each of the men through the window, which is a double shot, but we're counting that as one. And then Lucky shot towards the critter's claw, trying to touch Billy's hair, and then the double shot from both of the guys towards the creature in the tree.
Not inconsistent with the physical description of the metallic mini-men, they described the sounds of the shots ricocheting off them as if the rounds were hitting a metal bucket, which is all pretty interesting, and the impact didn't seem to have any effect on the little beings at all. They just kept moving, nimbly through the darkness as if to avoid light from the bulbs over the front and back doors, which the family turned on in order to better see their foe.
So there's a ufologist named Isabel Davis who did an investigation of the incident, actually doing interviews and stuff. And this is considered to be like the most thorough report or account of the incident.
Okay. So Davis's report on the incident described that Lucky and Billy went to the backyard to investigate after they heard a tapping noise on the kitchen roof. They found one of the little Tin Man monsters on the roof, at which point they fired a shot at it, knocking it off the roof. And of course, in true little Tin Man monster fashion, it leisurely floated toward the back fence, which from the looks of the map drawn of the property is actually about 40 feet away.
That's a long ways to Poppins.
It is. The creature perched up on the fence, and they took yet another shot at it, once again knocking it from its post. This time it dropped to all 4s, so there's 4s. I guess I already knew it had arms. It scurried away more like an animal than a humanoid. Remember that moment, because I'm going to bring something up later. It scurried away on all 4s like an animal later on.
Okay.
When we get into theories.
Okay. So, from the description of the situation, at no point do the witnesses describe the creatures to speak or make noise of any kind. Outside of the noise, which sounds like the claws tapping on the roof, and then the metallic ping of the bullets hitting their bodies, which sustained 0 damage points from the high-speed projectiles, they described that the bullets impacted their quote-unquote skin. It appeared as though the area of impact became more luminescent, which is really cool and really weird.
So it just kind of glowed?
Yeah.
So body armor? Spacesuit?
I really feel like it sounded like this is actually their skin and it's just impervious.
Oh.
The way that they drew and described it, there was no change in texture or defined barriers, you know.
But I feel like alien technology would have that. I still feel like it was a shield.
Well, maybe it was an invisible force field shield.
Maybe.
So the way that they describe them, though, I keep picturing the little creatures from, do you remember that kids movie Home with the cute little alien guy?
Sheldon Alien.
Can I come into the out now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy.
Adorable.
Freaking cute.
So at this point, we're considering the house to be, quote, under siege by all these weird little metal goblins. Absolutely. But up to this point, even when taking gunfire, there hasn't been any indication of hostile intent. Their behavior could be described as somewhat playful in nature, from my perspective, if not innocently mischievous. One of the points brought up in Davis's report is that they may not have even understood that the gunfire was antagonistic behavior, especially since it clearly wasn't damaging to them, which is sad because maybe these are just sweet little curious guys who want to play, and these people are trying to kill them.
What did they do to you, huh? Nothing.
So just last week you were criticizing people for not taking a shot at Mothman, and now you're offended about these folks shooting at weird creatures coming at them in their house?
They just want to come into the out now.
They want to come into the inn now.
Maybe.
I want to hang out with you.
They're just floating around.
Did you see the movie? I think I asked you earlier. You didn't see the movie. There's actually like 1980s-ish movie made. I think it was called Invasion at Kelly or Invasion of Kelly, where they kind of do a reenactment of this whole thing in movie form. It was pretty interesting. I watched it last night.
In low-budget movie form.
Yeah, it was low budget, but for the time, their stuff was pretty cool. Their aliens weren't the same as what they described from the actual encounter, but it was, you know.
They didn't have floppy ears.
I didn't see any of them gliding, but they were kind of like doing flips away from the gunfire. They didn't have any ears.
You know what I picture when they say doing flips? Yoda.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. These were tall, lanky, skinny, like what you'd regularly see as gray aliens with the eyes, and that's how they had them. But lots of things that you wrote about here were in the movie too, so I thought that I don't know, it's kind of an interesting watch.
Okay, so at this point, they kind of hunkered down inside the house, remaining in there for hours. They were just listening for the noises from outside, indicating to them that something may yet still be lurking there in the darkness. They would hear the occasional scratch on the roof, but other than that, it doesn't sound like there was much more going on at the time.
So while the description of the creatures themselves or their behavior didn't really sound too terribly scary or intimidating, I don't think the incident would be much less fear-inducing or traumatizing. It's still a lot to take in. According to an author of a report titled Close Encounter at Kelly and Others of 1955, one description of the creatures, as disclosed by Mrs. Langford, describes the creature as follows, quote, "It looked like a 5-gallon gasoline can with a head on top and small legs. It was shimmering bright metal-like on my refrigerator." Yes, terrifying, I know. She had spied one of these little beasts as she crouched in the hallway next to Billy, as she had been before he attempted to step outside.
So now that the noise had kind of died down, the party managed to make its way to the vehicles, and they kicked the tires and light the fires, top gunning it to the Hopkinsville police station. It was then that they would eventually report what they had seen to the local police chief, Russell Greenwell. One of my favorite aspects of this story is actually that Chief Greenwell didn't dismiss their story or mock it, nor did he treat them as though they were crazy, and in part because he himself had been witness to a UFO just a few years prior. Chief Greenwell, who was in his car at the time, along with many other drivers on the road at the time, stopped their cars and watched a glowing oval object hover in the sky over their heads. The unidentified object remained in the air, stationary above them for about 30 to 40 minutes, at which point it suddenly, at a high rate of speed, darted off out of sight into the night sky.
I feel like this adds an interesting dynamic to the story, because most of these situations, when they're reported to law enforcement, they are met with really staunch skepticism, typically, and much worse sometimes. Not to say there weren't others that saw the incident or heard about it, or the story being told in a different light than the chief, because there absolutely were, and we'll get to that. But before they got the opportunity to share the tale with Chief Greenwell, they met with the city officers who were at the time manning the police station. So their immediate response to the report was impressive, to say the least. The state police were contacted through their Madisonville headquarters, and they were advised to assemble immediately at the Hopkinsville police station, whether they were home or on patrol. They were ordered to redirect to that location. Along with the Hopkinsville City Police Department was a Christian County Sheriff's deputy who shared a station with the city department. Chief Greenwell was at home when he received the call, informing him that, quote, "a spaceship had landed at Kelly," unquote, and he was not amused. According to the report from Isabel Davis's interviews, his response to the call was, quote, "Is this your idea of a joke? Because it is not mine." To which the officer clarified that it was in fact not a joke and that the state police had been dispatched and were en route.
Time to put your pants on, Chief.
So these poor people had just been through all this weirdness and finally got out of the house. I can imagine the conversation that was being held in the car on the way to report what just happened. I can imagine it was along the lines of, they're not going to believe this and what in the world just happened. So walking into the police station, they were probably thinking that they were going to be looked at sideways for their story, and having the police be like, "I know, right?" probably felt so validated.
I don't know if they were really putting that much thought into it. I think there was just sheer effing panic.
They probably just were so scared that the cops believed them because, you can tell.
Which is why they believed them.
Yeah.
So, which we'll get into. Oh, and there was also a staff photographer for the Kentucky New Era that was dispatched to the call as well. So they really put a lot into their response.
Yeah.
You always need a member of the press, So he was the one who was skeptical as opposed to the law enforcement officers. He brought his wife along as well, which is definitely my type of family outing. Wouldn't you agree?
I would really agree.
I'm positive neither of our significant others would agree.
They would not go.
They would not go.
They don't care.
I'll stay home with the children.
If I woke up my husband and told him we were going to see a UFO, he would be so pissed at me for waking him up. He doesn't care. So when the state trooper arrived at the station, one of the Sutton vehicles led the way to the farm. Not far behind it and moving fast was a second trooper car with sirens wailing, and the chief followed close behind in his own patrol car. I think I would have had them turn off the lights and sirens so that they didn't scare them away. I would want to sneak back up in there, so that we could catch them by surprise. But that's not what happened. It sounds like they went in there guns blazing and sirens wailing, but whatever.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
No one ever listens to me. When they reached their turnoff to Kelly, they were met by another trooper car who was waiting to follow them to the scene. Also, in an article about the encounter from History.com, it was mentioned that military police from Fort Campbell were also present for the investigation. It sounds like on the road to Kelly, just outside of Hopkinsville, one of the troopers had heard what he described as meteors, sounding like artillery fire overhead. Which I thought was weird, because I've never heard meteors sound like that.
I've never heard meteors at all.
No, they're usually far away and quiet. When he looked out the window of his vehicle, he managed to catch a glimpse of 2 meteors descending from the southwest toward the Langford farm. He went on to elaborate initially that he did not believe these objects to have been your standard everyday meteor, as he watched a meteor shower earlier in August, which would have been the Perseids. What was it that set these apart from the previous meteors that he had seen? They were brighter and bigger, and they were making noise, like we said. From the sounds of it, however, later he was heard saying that they were in fact just meteors. So there's that.
So he backpedaled.
But they were brighter and bigger and making noise.
Her face looks so defeated.
I'm disappointed in that. Believe.
I want to believe.
Why you gotta be like that? You know? They're just meteors, but he obviously thought they weren't.
Right.
But then they always go back because they don't want everyone to think they're crazy.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
So the farm is now swarming with boots and flashlights. All taking the lead from Chief Greenwell, they scour the yard and the outbuildings as well as the house. So make note that at the time that the police are inside the house, the family members refuse to enter and remain outside.
Hell yes.
Chief Greenwell described the atmosphere around the farm as tense, with a strange uneasiness looming over everyone as they milled around the property. At one point, Chief Greenwell divulged that one of the officers stepped on a cat's tail in the dark.
This is hilarious.
And when the cat howled, a sudden barrage of pistols were drawn and pointed in panic.
Oh, holy shit.
So
they all just whipped around with their pistols.
Yeah. While this is really funny to picture, it would not be funny to be the one that the pistols are pointed at.
No.
And in a panic situation like that, they're really lucky that someone didn't accidentally discharge their gun.
Goddamn kitty cat.
So perhaps the genuine fear radiating from the witnesses to the event was spreading like a virus through the ranks, and everyone on the farm could feel it.
I feel like that makes it so much more believable. I mean, obviously they felt like something happened. Something obviously happened to this family.
Mm-hmm. There was no question that their fear was genuine.
Yeah.
By anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this led me to kind of think that the Langfords and the Suttons were obviously convincingly shaken up by this event. You know, when someone telling you something like this, I feel like it wouldn't be that hard to tell if they were making it up. Obviously, these must have been pretty believable folks who were really bothered by what happened, and they weren't able to explain it. B, I don't really know how big the town of Kelly is, and it sounds like these people lived more into the country. But I'm going to guess that from the response of the police, these were likely people that they didn't feel would make something like this up. They're probably honest, down-to-earth people. A group of men were in the backyard searching the area where Lucky and Billy had shot one of the creatures down from the fence post. It was at that fence where the men stood looking into a field where something odd stood out to them. A small 1.5-foot diameter patch on the grass which appeared to be luminous. The next day, a piece of aluminum foil was found in the corner of the fence. Chief Greenwell remained adamant that they could definitely tell the difference between a strange luminous patch and a piece of tinfoil. It was not what they were looking at. I hate when they do that. You hear this in all these stories when they're like, I saw this. And everyone's like, no, you saw this. I don't know. It just drives me crazy when I get trying to find the reasonable explanations for something, but when someone is so adamant that it definitely wasn't that, You can't act like they'd just never seen a piece of tinfoil in the grass.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just drives me crazy.
And to specify, the person who pointed out the tinfoil the next day was the photographer, the media person who was already skeptical to begin with.
Okay. I do respect finding a reasonable answer for things, but coming up with suggestions and making people offended or look stupid makes me irritated, I guess.
It seems like there was some discrepancy between the accounts of the neighbors as to what they had heard on that night. Some investigators of the incident reported that the neighbors did say that they'd heard gunshots as reported by the Langford Sutton family and their guests. Other investigators' reports stated that they had been told by the neighbors that they had heard nothing. Spent shells were found by the first officer on scene, which corroborated the story that shots were fired by the men. But at what? That was the question. Alas, the question would remain unanswered as the search of the property that night bore no fruit. Or aliens.
Or no aliens.
So that is to say, no little gray men, no spaceship, or strange lights. Not even a footprint on the ground made the presence of the creatures evidence to those who were searching, much to the relief of some and the dismay of others.
Among those who expressed their disappointment were the cameraman and his wife, who begrudgingly complained about the distinct lack of creatures, aliens, ships, and what have you, lamenting the fortune that they may have acquired had they obtained a photograph of just one. I'm sure the family wishes there had been a photograph too. It probably would have been a lot easier to prove what happened to them. Few by few, the officers, deputies, and military police filtered out with a promise to return the next day, when it was light, to recanvass the area. That wasn't very reassuring to a family who had been left to remain there overnight to face their fears. The flashlights and brave men to protect them were gone, and they were again alone in the dark at the farm, probably surrounded by many metallic humanoids with unknown intentions.
Which was, in fact, the case, as their story goes. It was around 2:30 a.m. Mrs. Langford turned out all of the lights and went to bed, lying with her face towards the window, darkness surrounding her, when she noticed a glow out the window. Creeper's gonna creep.
A glow out the window after they all left and it's back?
So there stood a little goblin-looking creature with his little claw hands resting on the screen, staring in, quietly, just staring at her.
Like he's saying hello.
Let me into the inn. Hey, let me out of the out.
He wanted to come in. So she called the other members of the house to the room. Meanwhile, would alternate looking away from the window and back at it, thinking perhaps her eyes were being deceptive. But when she looked back each time, there the little guy stood, still watching, hands up on the screen. Enter Lucky, gun in hand, raised toward the window, which stood between him and his target. Lucky stated, "I'm gonna shoot." To which his mother replied, "For God's sake, don't. For the record, if this was a movie, this would be my favorite part." In defiance of his mother's pleas, he flatly expressed, "Mama, I'm gonna shoot that little man."
Mama, I'm gonna shoot that little man.
At which point, he pulled the trigger. Once again, the creatures proved impervious to the impotent weapons wielded by these mere mortals, and the shot did, however, damage the window frame.
Everyone was back up again, hyper-vigilant and aware of the tiny invaders, who would make slow attempts to approach the house with their little hands reaching for the sky, as if to reassure them that they, quote-unquote, come in peace. Maybe it means something else to them entirely. Or maybe it means nothing at all. Maybe it's attack position, like a crab. Claws in the air, like Zoidberg.
Hey.
So, the last sighting occurred just a little after 5:15, which would have been Monday morning, August the 22nd, right before the sun came up that day, which may give way to the theory that the little creatures are partial to dwelling in the darkness.
I keep thinking about how innocent that they must look, and I likely would have gone out to make friends. I think honestly at this point I would have been like, okay, they're probably nice. They seem nice. But then I remember Travis Walton, and my distrust of these cute little buggers comes right back. Stay away from the light. After a long night of no sleep, the next day life went on. Lucky, JC, and OP left for an 85-mile road trip to Indiana to borrow a truck and move some furniture, or something like that, while Billy Ray and a neighbor went out for a hunt, leaving the women at home all alone. I'm not sure how happy I would be about that if I was abandoned by my husband after an ordeal like that. However, the daylight may have removed some of the fear factor. I still likely wouldn't want to stay home. It seems strange to me too that the guys would leave knowing that the police were supposed to return to the farm the next afternoon. You would think that they would want to be there for anything they might find, for interviews, and whatnot.
As they had promised, the investigation continued in the daylight, combing the yard, the woods, the surrounding areas for any signs of aircraft or alien to no avail. Even the dusty roof was devoid of any footprints or signs that anything had been climbing on top of it. As we'd mentioned before, there was no rain, so there was plenty of dust accumulated on the tin roof. One would expect to have found at least a footprint or some disturbed dust if a creature had in fact been running amok atop of the house.
Were they running amok or were they gliding around?
I don't know. Maybe they float.
They heard footprints.
Well, they heard tippy-tappy.
So maybe they were feet in the air, hands down.
The ladies and the children who were left to fend for themselves that day faced the scrutiny of never-ending questions about the incident. Chief Greenwell admitted that he had intentionally asked misleading questions with inaccurate descriptive details in order to test the continuity of their accounts. He would talk to them one by one and then talk to them again and again to see if their story would change. The local police weren't the only ones to return that afternoon. One of the state troopers come back as well. He too spoke to the children and the neighbors, trying to assess what had happened and determine what happened, if anything.
So from what I gather in the report written by Isabel Davis, there was concern that the incident had been alcohol-induced. While he didn't make a point to openly discuss it, he did look for signs of heavy consumption. So Greenwell must have had the exact same thoughts, but while he didn't make a point to openly discuss it, he did look for signs of heavy consumption in the house. From what I can surmise...
I had to put that in there.
It sounds so pretentious.
I know.
I hate it.
From what I can surmise.
He did find a couple of beer cans in the trash can, but nothing really of any significance. So Mrs. Langford made a statement regarding her strict prohibition of alcohol in the house. Any small amount of evidence of inebriation or impairment is grounds for skeptics to add fuel to the fires of doubt. This is very clearly a difficult type of story to absorb as truth for most people. There's got to be some other explanation for what they thought they saw, right? However, it wasn't just one person that saw it. They all did. Well, all but one. June straight up refused to look, which, go girl. As far as investigators were concerned, skeptic or not, the response to the experience and the fear in the face of the family that night was genuine and unquestionable. The investigator who had ridden in a vehicle with Billy Ray that night noted that he was pale and pretty much hysterical. You can fake fear in some ways, he said, but his physiological response was too convincing to dismiss. It's hard to force your heart to pound at 140 beats a minute.
As far as Chief Greenwell was concerned, he too had a little doubt as to the authenticity of their fear, asserting that it was proof enough to him that they had to have had a damn good reason for coming into Hopkinsville at all. He said they aren't the type of people to call for help. These are the type of people to grab their guns, which of course they did. That's not a direct quote, but it's a paraphrase, but that's the essence of his opinion.
Okay. So
these are my people. Grab your gun. But
I think that they are damn near everyone in rural Iowa's people too. Because, I mean, if you live out in the country and you're far away from everything, any resources, then yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way you react to things like this. Is it's going to be, I know if we call the cops, aside from our local city cop, if we had to rely on county cops, especially, or ambulance services or anything, it's 25 minutes at least.
Easy.
At least where I'm at.
But for people like this, knowing that you're shooting your guns at these is a little more effective than throwing a marshmallow at a lion. You'd kind of feel like you had no choice but to seek out that outside assistance.
Right. If you can't take care of it at home, obviously.
And so they called for help from people who have more marshmallows.
Right.
I mean, that's why you call the cops, because they also have guns.
Bring the tannerite. That's what would happen at our house. He'd call his friend and bring the tannerite. Before we get into the hoopla of questioning the authenticity of the experience as told by the eyewitnesses, let's get into the way the investigation was handled. As we discussed, it seems as though the claim, while not necessarily taken at face value by all parties, was taken seriously, well-manned, and somewhat thorough. Nowhere in my research did I, or other researchers who mentioned these points specifically, find that the area of the search was roped off or protected in any way from people who may go traipsing about, damaging any possible evidence. There was no mention of a search being coordinated by grids or sections. There was no chain of evidence or systematic approach for the collection of evidence at all, such as the shotgun shells. So they basically just observed it and wrote it down.
And unlike every alien movie ever, no one ever attempted to bring or use a Geiger counter in the area, unless of course it was done by the military in secret, or we couldn't find the report. Either way.
Andrew Ledwith, who worked at a local radio station, took the opportunity to take part after having heard what allegedly happened. He came to the residence around 11 a.m. in the morning after the invasion occurred, not in an official capacity, however, but as a hobbyist. It was fortuitous that he at one time studied art. He took along a witness, the owner of the radio station he worked for, and went to the home to interview the eyewitnesses and draw some police-style sketches of whatever they described. The man who accompanied him, Mike Lackey, was there to ensure that the interview was on the level, and that there was no leading questions or direction given to the witnesses by the interviewer/artist, which I think was a great idea. Ledwith documented his account with the witnesses, stating that the women were very firm on their certainty regarding what it was they saw that night. They gave their description of the creatures in detail to him, and he put it on paper just as they said. He specified that they were quick to correct him if he got ahead of them or made assumptions as to what any particular feature may look like. We'll post these drawings on our social media accounts for you to look at. They're pretty interesting, really. Be looking for those on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. They describe the creatures to him as we described them earlier. Large saucer-like eyes, flappy leather-like ears that were too big for their little short gas can-like bodies, long arms that nearly dragged to the ground, talon-like claw fingers, short legs that didn't appear to have knee joints or bend when the creatures ran, bald round head, no decisive nose, no neck to speak of, and metallic-looking skin. There was no description of what type of feet the little guys had, as no one actually saw them long enough to describe them.
After Ledwith put it all on paper, Mrs. Langford approved the accuracy of the sketch in comparison to what she saw and described, and decided she didn't want to look at it anymore. It's too accurate. She didn't want to look at it anymore. She called Mrs. Taylor, who had refused to look at them all throughout the ordeal, and showed her what it was that they had been dealing with. The sketch was offered to the state police, who were on scene, continuing the investigation amidst the sightseers milling about the area, looking for aliens or signs that they had been there. The state police made arrangements to have the sketch picked up by a local trooper and transmitted by him to the headquarters, which they did end up picking up, but it was like a week later, I think, that they came and got the sketch to send it. The Air Force officer, who was also on scene for the investigation, although no one was entirely sure of his role there, was not at all interested in looking at or accepting a copy of said sketch, so it would seem from Ledwith's written account of his experience with the case.
He already knew what they look like.
Suspicious, yeah, and
It gets there.
Yeah.
A little after noon, Mrs. Langford joined Ledwith and Lackey in their car, where they listened to the radio broadcast of the interview that had taken place earlier that morning regarding the incident, as there was no radio in the home. Ledwith and Lackey took a short walk afterwards to see for themselves the gully that supposed spaceship allegedly landed in. It doesn't sound like they found anything that struck them as evidence of an aircraft or an incident of any kind having taken place in the area. It was almost 2 p.m. when everyone reconvened at the Langford-Sutton home, at which point, or thereabout, Billy Ray returned from his hunting trip, and without prompting or being told of its existence at all, he saw the sketch laying on the table. He picked it up and excitedly expressed, "That's it. That looks just like it," which was somewhat chilling to the artist.
Later that night, when Lucky saw the drawing, the detail he took issue with was the shape of the face, as he insisted that there was no chin-like point, but the face was almost entirely rounded. In comparison to the drawing guided by the women, the men disputed whether or not there was a mouth, and if there had been, it was little more than a straight line across the face. They never observed a moving mouth or attempt at verbal communications. They also had slightly different perceptions of the ears, in which the men described as higher on the head and flatter against it than the women's description had indicated. So they thought it looked like they laid back against the head more like human ears would, as opposed to sticking out like dog ears like the women described.
Before Lucky had even made it home, Billy Ray had come home and saw the drawing, corroborating the description given by Mrs. Langford. Billy Ray had excitedly added a few descriptive details, which he asserts he observed. Details that it seemed only he observed, which included a more muscular body, rounded suction cup feet, a nose, and antenna. He was very assertive about these details in describing them to Ledwith for his own artistic rendition of the Little Green Men. Ledwith, skeptical of his conveniently late recovered memories, handed Billy Ray Taylor off to one of the Air Force personnel, who seemed to eat up every bit of the embellishment. Billy Ray seemed to be relishing the attention he was getting from the situation. However, at this point, he sort of recanted the detail of the nose, as Lucky was certain there wasn't one. At first, he did argue this point, but then he started to back off, unsure if he saw what he thought he saw. It was at this point that Taylor's credibility as a witness began to come into question, especially in the eyes of the Air Force soldier who had openly taken his word about what he had seen. But like we said before, Ledwith was already questioning him a little bit. Lucky has suggested that there may have been some webbing between the clawed fingers. The men did agree with Taylor's strong upper body description. They all agreed on the thin arms and legs. Unlike Taylor, Lucky didn't seem to be the type to exaggerate based on Ledwith's assessment.
With the exception of some of Taylor's outliers, the features, descriptions, and stories of the experience were nearly identical. Given the circumstances of the day's schedule, with the men all leaving early and the women being occupied by visitors all that day, it's unlikely that they would have had time to discuss and collaborate their stories. So I feel like the accuracy of the stories between all of them says a lot. And they were all very confident in their recollections. Outside of the nose situation with Billy Ray, other than that, they were all pretty confident in what they saw. According to Ledwith, who seemed to have maintained his objectivity pretty astutely, even under cross-examination, they remained confident. And to quote Ledwith, I use the word cross-examination loosely, because where Lucky is concerned, you didn't exactly cross-examine Lucky Sutton.
Lucky comes across as a firm, no-nonsense, strong type of guy. The same goes for the matriarch of the family, Mrs. Langford, who seemingly was not inclined toward frivolity. Once the report of the encounter became public knowledge, their words didn't seem to matter much to those who spread around the many skewed versions of the tale. And we all know how that is living in a small town. You get many versions of what happened before you actually get the actual version because everyone's calling each other and telling each other about it, and it's all wrong. The family farm was inundated with unwelcome visitors, nosy Nancys, and looky-loos, traipsing and trampling about with no regard for the privacy of those who resided in the residence or had endured the traumatic experience. People would even go so far and be so invasive as to walk through the door and conduct their own private interviews with the members of the household at any given time without invitation. The family was receiving requests from vendors to set up shop and sell concessions and souvenirs on their property. The family, of course, turned them all down. I feel like that says a lot for the family. I feel as though the fact that they abstained from the publicity and the popularity, trying to stay out of the spotlight, adds significantly to my personal likelihood to believe that this wasn't a stunt for publicity. The Suttons were interviewed and featured on the radio one time to share their story. I spoke to Lonnie, one of the children, to his grandson, Ronnie, and he said that his grandfather did an interview for the History Channel one time, and he really wasn't into talking about it. I didn't really get a response from Lonnie about doing an interview, but it really just doesn't sound like they are really that interested in talking about it anymore. I think it caused them a lot of problems. But I couldn't find the History Channel interview. He said he didn't really know much about it. So it doesn't sound like it's a big, to-do in their family. So, maybe he could have easily just thought that happened and he wasn't really sure about it. It really doesn't sound like they talk about it that much. Who knows?
Mrs. Langford made a public appeal. Quote, "The people are worrying us to death. Please tell them not to come here and worry us." Obviously did no good. The people did not care. The crowds continued to pour in, and state troopers were called on multiple occasions by the family to clear the crowds from the property, for only short periods of time, of course. No trespassing signs were placed on the property, which, of course, was another marshmallow throwing situation, meaning to say, it didn't do a damn thing to help the family stave off the vultures.
I have to say, though, what if the aliens like marshmallows?
What if?
What if they just ate them?
There were literally no marshmallows.
I know,
it's a figurative marshmallow.
Just saying.
On that Tuesday, the same day that the signs were put up, the Air Force made 2 official statements to the press, which were as follows. There had been no official investigation of the reports of the spaceship and its passengers. And then the second statement was that there was no basis for the report. For the most part, as far as the public was concerned, it was more of a fun, entertaining fiction than something that truly happened to a real family in real life. The house was a fun place to stop and have a picnic, and the media didn't do much to help that.
On that Wednesday, the Madisonville, Kentucky Messenger ran the headline, "Earthmen Profit. See where the Tubmen landed, only 50 cents per." That was one description of the spaceship, and what it looked like was that it looked like an egg-shaped number 2 wash tub, hence nickname Tubmen for the supposed occupants. The story included the following paragraph. There was no report on how many sightseers were willing to pay 50 cents to look at the Sutton farmhouse, but it was reported that some 2,000 persons went as far as the road in front of the farmhouse yesterday. Billy Ray Taylor was reported to have accepted payments from 2 reporters in exchange for the story. They claimed that the Taylors were destitute. The papers also ran statements from astronomers out of Lexington and Louisville. One of them said that the creatures, like the little men, could not exist in our solar system. And the other statement was that the report was imagination. So things weren't going exactly in their favor in any sense.
There were those who were more open to believing the family was telling the truth, if based on nothing other than their strong insistence that they were. They did not waver in their story or their conviction.
People continued to show up. The family had no control over it. They did finally post a sign charging 50-cent admission and then later raised it to $1, but that did about as much good as no trespassing signs. There were no fences, gates, or guards to keep them out. There were no locks, no way to keep them out or even collect the entry charge they demanded. It was hopeless. And then, of course, it was assumed by some that the whole ordeal had been a money-making scheme from the start. I really think that they just started charging to get in just to kind of deter
Keep people out, yeah.
Because they didn't at first. I mean, it took them a while to even start putting up any signs to charge anybody.
But for a story which bore little weight, the military maintained its interest, returning over and over with more questions for the family about the experience. Highly suspicious. It sounds like, from one report, that there had been 3 personnel from Fort Campbell who had come to the farm asking for descriptions of the little men. They wanted every minute detail. After receiving a satisfactory amount of information from the witnesses, they returned to the farm a few hours later with a model of the creature. I have constructed a model. So they had the family examine the model, attesting to its accuracy, and it must have been built perfectly per their descriptions, as no changes were made to the model. It was reported that Mrs. Langford's statement about the model's depiction of what she had seen with her own eyes was that, quote, the man who made it must have known exactly what they looked like, unquote. And, knowing the military and their odd interest in the case, they probably had.
I guarantee they had.
Bastards. You guys know me well enough at this point to know that I have strong convictions in just believing the military and the government.
Yeah, while I love our troops, the higher-ups are highly suspect.
No, they're not. They're honest. We trust our government.
What?
They're always honest.
Mm-mm.
Are you kidding? They only want what's best for us.
That's a hard no. Hard no.
Cannot confirm.
What sets this case apart from many other encounter stories at the time was that there was more emphasis on the beings themselves and little on the UFO. If you recall, the UFO was sighted by Billy Ray Taylor and no one else. At the time, he excitedly announced the strange anomaly to which he alone had bore witness. The Suttons laughed at him and dismissed his tale as a farce. I'm not sure that I would necessarily immediately believe any of my friends if they were to run into the house and tell me that they had seen a UFO, but I am not so afraid of looking gullible that I wouldn't rush out to try to see it for myself. I guarantee I would. Take me with you. I think back to the Mothman encounters that we had discussed a few episodes back, where those who reported the sightings were so well respected that their stories were considered truthful from the start. They were not laughed at or dismissed. From what I have read about the investigators of this specific case, even those who did not have any previous familiarity with the family, that is exactly how they too perceived the Suttons and Mrs. Langford. The only person whose integrity has been questioned at all was the one man who was the witness to the UFO, which is pretty unfortunate in this case. Although, whether they had believed his report or not, there was pretty much no physical evidence of the method by which the creatures had arrived on the farm. However, outside of the witness stories and the obvious evidence that something had happened on the farm that night, there was not definitive evidence of the creatures either.
There were other strange reports from that night in that respect, as a neighbor to the south of the Sutton farm, Ernest Long, had reported seeing a light or a fireball pass over his house going north at about 6:30 p.m. We can't forget that one of the troopers responding to the Sutton house had also reported seeing the strange meteors that night. There was another statement which had been made by the neighbor with whom Billy Ray Taylor went hunting the morning after the incident. He lived about 1/4 of a mile to the north of the Sutton farm. So this statement did not come straight from the witness to the investigator. It was a statement supposedly made to Taylor who repeated it to Mr. Ledwith, who included it in his report to Davis, who was investigating the incident. So it's like fourth hand. Now that we've got all that confusion out of the way, the statement that was made was that early that Sunday evening between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, he had noticed lights moving in the field behind the farmhouse and thought that perhaps his neighbors, the Suttons, pigs had gotten loose and they were out running around trying to round them up. He stated, "I thought maybe I ought to go help them, but I'm glad I didn't. I might have been shot."
Yeah, I was watching the movie and there was a scene where the neighbors were like, let's go over and see what's going on because they're screaming and all this stuff. And then they heard all the gunfire and didn't go. And I was like, oh my God, one of them is going to walk over there and shoot their neighbor. But they didn't. So yes, very happy. Very happy that did not occur.
So the time frame in which he reported having seen these lights was approximately the same time that the Suttons reported that the creatures made their debut. But then again, the statement having come from Taylor, who was just really enjoying the spotlight, who knows if it's accurate or not.
So let's talk about another bit of evidence that was in question. There was mention of holes in the screen from Sutton and Taylor firing at the creatures through the window. From Davis's report, it sounds like they found 5 small holes, which were attributed to a .22 rifle, 1 hole attributed to a 12-gauge shotgun, and 1 attributed to a 20-gauge shotgun. The wires of the screen were bending in an outward direction, indicating that the shots were fired from the inside to the outside. The biggest magic bullet piece of evidence here is that of another hole that was discovered in the screen.
I want to point out that this is Sarah's favorite part of the story.
The hole in question was square, clearly not made by gunfire. Then another hole, which was not present upon the initial investigation, but was there the next day.
And I think that's referring to the 20 gauge.
The skeptic theory is that they tried to fake evidence by poking the screen with a tobacco stick. Of course, they denied this theory, stating that they just shot at the things out the window, and that's all they knew. The explanation for the other hole's absence during the first investigation was that Lucky had fired on the creature when it returned after the initial incident was over. There were plenty of jokes made about the square shooters by investigators.
All of the other reasons for skepticism aside, it's a pretty obvious, however unpleasant assumption that much of the skepticism came about from pre-existing bias in relation to the social standing and lifestyle of the family. While they wouldn't have fallen into the backwoods hillbilly category per se, they were country folk nonetheless, living a modest life in their unpainted 3-room house.
So they were just like kind of simple living people, but plenty of people are like that. And I think that's respectable.
Yeah. So they weren't considered high class in any sense of the word and were likely seen as lesser by many of the townsfolk, especially seeing how Lucky and Billy Ray were carnival people, a profession which has a reputation for sensationalism and swindling, which probably was exacerbated by the attempts to charge admission.
So one thing that you didn't discuss that I did read about was the theories of the people who did believe that they saw something. They had theories about what they saw. And basically, the leading theory, from what I understand, was that it was a group of large owls, which owls can be 3 feet tall. It's not that uncommon, waddling around, and that the lights that they saw happened to be a meteor shower that happened on the same night. So this was Attack of the Owls during a meteor shower. I feel like probably not. I don't feel like the owls would have come up to the house, looked in the windows, tapped on the ceiling, reached down and grabbed Billy Ray's hair, and at no point did they discuss wings or beaks or anything like that.
And owls can't skitter on all 4s.
No, and they can't flip around Matrix style away from gunfire. And an owl will fly away. Well, sometimes. They're pretty brave, really.
Owls really get a bad rap because that was one of the explanations for the Mothman, was a big owl.
Owls are actually my favorite animal. I love them. Ooh. They are like the coolest things ever.
Ooh.
And grizzly bears.
What's your theory?
Not owls. I don't believe it was owl. I don't feel like if you shot an owl, it would make a tink sound either. That was in the movie too. Every time they shot the gun, tink, tink, tink. And then it was like they were trying to depict the gunfire, but they would have to cancel out the sound of the gun. So you wouldn't actually hear the gun shoot. You just hear this click and tink.
What about the conspiracy group that birds are government spy robots? What if they used the government robot owls because they were suspicious?
You thought they were moonshiners?
Maybe.
I don't feel like the government had the technology to make modified drone pigeons at that time, though. I don't believe it. There's Sam's theory. I guess we know now.
No,
How do you feel?
I go kind of back and forth whether I think it was aliens per se, but it was something. Goblins is a theory.
I mean, I don't know why goblins would be any more believable than aliens. Here, let me throw out a reasonable theory. Goblins. Don't feed it after midnight. Name it Gizmo. It's adorable.
At least they're terrestrial.
I guess that's gremlins.
Which is also a theory.
Is it?
Is it?
Well, which one? Which creature of lore was it?
Giorgio Tsoukalos, we need you.
Yep. This is a story I've heard several times, and I have always found myself entranced every time someone's telling it, because it's a crazy story. And I believe them. I find myself believing it. Because they didn't make it some big to-do. You don't see them all over the place. Like the Betty and Barney Hill incident that we had an episode about before. I was way more inclined to believe Barney because he was so, I don't want to talk about it. He was super traumatized. You could tell the only time he ever really gave any description of what happened was under hypnosis. Where, people were much less likely to believe Betty because she was sensationalizing the whole thing, soaking up any attention she could get even years after the fact. And she was criticized numerous times from her performances at different alien cons and things like that she would just take over the entire thing and tell completely different stories from one to the next. Yeah, those people are a lot more believable. And it sounds like these people were Barney Hill type.
Well, there you have it, folks. The facts of the case as we know them and the theories that have been presented by those who were present to investigate the evidence as well as interview the witnesses. There for you to draw your very own conclusion about the event. Government birds. Government robot owls. We hope that you enjoyed listening, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on whichever app you listen from and leave us a rating and a review. Hunt us down on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok and follow us. We're so fun.
We're so fun.
Send us a message. Email us at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com, or you can call our voicemail and leave us a message. The number is 641-812-2635.
Please leave us a voicemail because every single time my phone alerts that there's a voicemail, I get super excited and it feels like Christmas.
And it is just a voicemail. You won't get sucked into a weird, awkward conversation with any of us.
Because we know, I'm the kind of girl that hides from the UPS guy till he's gone, so I understand. And I want to give a shout out real quick to one of our listeners and good friend, Jared Warren, because the last voicemail that we put on the air last week, Phenomena, we didn't know who it was until when he sent us a text message talking about how sexy his voice was. So we kind of got the idea that it was Jared.
And also, he's already planning on taking my spot if I ever get kicked off the podcast. He's the new co-host.
Yeah, you may meet him at some point because he really wants to come on here and hang out with us. Because we're really super cool.
We are super cool.
So who could blame him? Jared, we understand. We get it.
Anyway, we love getting feedback on what you love about the show, what you want to hear, and what you think we can do better. If you have any cool stories, we love to hear them too. And don't forget that there's still time to get in on this month's contest, which concludes on May 15th.
So all you have to do to be entered into the contest is just recommend our show on any platform, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any of those things. You just have to recommend us or kind of give us a shout out. Just make sure you tag us in whatever you do just so we get an alert that you did and we can put you in the drawing.
Or
the more you recommend us, if you do it multiple times, for every time you do it, we put you in the drawing. So that's just more times you get to be in the hat and the odds are better that you'll win it.
Also, I want to say that I'm totally addicted to Twitter right now. So if you could make us trend on Twitter, I would be so excited.
I don't even know what trend on Twitter means.
So you can also post a photo on our Facebook of you doing your best Mothman impersonation or Mothmanning, which is my favorite way to get into the contest. So far, we've only had one of those. Technically two, but submitted by one person. Don't forget to check out the Regulators podcast. Regulators!
Mount up
and down. So listen to their review of our show. Once again, thanks for being here with us, and we hope you keep coming back for this ear candy.
Yep.
Ear candy.
She's really riding that train.
It's like eye candy, but to your ears.
Mm-hmm. I really like the part of the review where he's like, it sounds like they came out of the same birth canal.
No, they
hand
came
in
out
hand.
Holding hands, yeah.
Hand in hand from the same birth canal.
Not quite, but close.
I mean, we did come from the same one. yet different times.
How fortuitous that we fell out of the same womb. I don't think we fell out. Sorry, Mom. That sounds really bad.
Sorry, Mom.
Happy Mother's Day.
That was no.
That did sound bad.
Poor Mom. This is why she's drunk all the time.
This is why she's always drunk.
She's going to be so mad.
Come at me, bro.